Hello, everyone. This is Minister William, or Reverend Will, if you wish, in today's sermon for October 31st, 2021. And as always, we will start with a moment of silence for prayer, meditation, or what have you. Okay, thank you. As you see, I am not in my normal minister vestments. Since today is Halloween, I figured I would read a little bit of history on this holiday, especially since my personal religion is paganism, and High Priestess Yolanda is a Wicca. So I figured this would be a good a good sermon for this week. Halloween origins date back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, and this is on History.com topics of Halloween, history of Halloween. The Celts, who lived 2,000 years ago, mostly in the area that is now Ireland, the United Kingdom, and northern France, celebrated their new year on November 1st. This day marked the end of summer and the harvest, and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time of year that was often associated with human death. Celts believed that on the night before the new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead were blurred. On the night of October 31st, they celebrated Samhain, when it was believed the ghost of the dead returned to Earth. In addition to causing trouble and damaging crops, Celts thought that the pressure of otherworldly spirits made it easier for the Druids and Celtic priests to make predictions about the future. For a people entirely dependent on volatile nature, the volatile natural world, these prophecies were an important source of comfort during the long dark winter. To commemorate the event, Druids built huge bonfires where the people gathered to burn crops and animals as sacrifices to the Celtic deities. During the celebration, the Celts wore costumes, typically consisting of animal heads and skins, and attempted to tell each other's fortunes. When the celebration was over, they relit their hearth fires, which they had extinguished earlier in that evening, from the sacred bonfire to help protect them during the coming winter. By 43 AD, the Roman Empire had conquered the majority of the Celtic territory. In the course of 400 years that they ruled the Celtic lands, two festivals of Roman origin were combined with the traditional Celtic celebration of Samhain. The first was Fairalina Day. I'm probably butchering a day in late October when the Romans traditionally commiserated the passing of the dead. The second day was to honor Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruits and trees. The symbol of Pomona is the apple, and the incorporation of this celebration into Samhain probably explains the tradition of bobbing for apples that is practiced today on Halloween. All Saints' Day. On May 13th, 609 AD, Pope Boniface IV, Boniface IV, dedicated the Pantheon in Rome in honor of all Christian martyrs, and the Catholic feast of All Martyrs' Day was established in the Western Church. Pope Gregory III later expanded the festival to include All Saints as well as All Martyrs was and moved the observation from May 13th to November 1st. By the 9th century, the influence of Christianity had spread into Celtic lands where it where it gradually blended with and supplemented older Celtic rites. In 1000 AD, the Church made November 2nd, All Souls' Day, a day to honor the dead. It's widely believed today that the Church was attempting to replace the Celtic Festival of the Dead and related the Church-sanctioned holiday. All Saints' Day was celebrated similarly to Samhain, with big bonfires, parades, and dressing up in costumes as saints and angels and devils. The All Saints' Day celebration was also called All Hallows, or All Hallowmas, from the Middle English All Hallowmas, or however you pronounce that, meaning All Saints' Day. And the night before it, the traditional night of Samhain in the Celtic religion, began to be called All Hallows' Eve, and eventually Halloween. Halloween comes to America. The celebration of Halloween was extremely limited in the colonial New England because of the rigid Protestant belief system there. Halloween was much more common in Maryland and the southern colonies. As believed and as beliefs and customs of different European ethnic groups and the American Indians meshed, a distinctly American version of Halloween began to emerge. The first celebrations included play parties, which were public events held to celebrate the harvest. Neighbors would share stories of the dead, tell each other's fortunes, dance and sing. Colonial Halloween festivities also featured the telling of ghost stories and mischief making of all kinds. By the middle of the 19th century, annual autumn festivals were common, but Halloween was not yet celebrated everywhere in the country. In the second half of the 19th century, America was flooded with new immigrants. These new immigrants, especially the millions of Irish fleeing the Irish potato famine, helped to popularize the celebration of Halloween nationally. The history of trick-or-treating. Borrowing from the European traditions, Americans began to dress up in costumes and go house to house asking for food, money, a practice that eventually became today's trick-or-treating tradition. Young women believed that on Halloween they could divine the name or appearance of their future husband by doing tricks with yarn, apple paring, or mirrors. In the late 1800s, there was a move in America to mold Halloween into a holiday more about community and neighborly get-togethers than about ghosts, pranks, and witchcraft. At the turn of the century, Halloween parties for both children and adults became the most common way to celebrate the day. Parties were focused on games, food of the season, and festive costumes. Parents were encouraged by newspapers and community leaders to take anything frightening or grotesque out of Halloween celebrations. Because of these efforts, Halloween lost most of its superstitious and religious overtones by the beginning of the 12th century. Halloween parties. By the 1920s to 1930s, Halloween had become a secular but community-centered holiday, with parades to the town-wide Halloween parties as, as the featured entertainment. Despite the best efforts of many schools and communities, vandalism began to plague some celebrations in many communities during this time. By the 1950s, town leaders had successfully limited vandalism, and Halloween had evolved into a holiday directed mainly at the young. Due to high numbers of young children during the 50s baby boom, parties moved from the town civic center into classroom or home, where they could be more easily accommodated. Between 1920 to 1950, the centuries-old practice of trick-or-treating was revived. Trick-or-treating was a relatively inexpensive way for an entire community to share the Halloween celebration. In theory, families could also prevent tricks being played on them by providing neighborhood children with small treats. Thus, a new tradition. Thus, a new American tradition was born, and it was continued to grow. Today's Americans spend an estimated $6 billion annually on Halloween, making it the country's second largest commercial holiday after Christmas. Halloween movies. Speaking of commercial success, scary Halloween movies made a long history of being box office hits. Classic Halloween movies included the Halloween franchise, based on the 1978 original film directed by John Carpenter and starring Donald Pleasence, Nick Castle, Jamie Lee Curtis, Tony Moran. In Halloween, a young boy named Michael Myers murders his 17-year-old sister and is committed to jail, only to escape as a teen on Halloween night and seek out his old home and new target. A direct sequel to the original Halloween was released in 2018, starring Jamie Lee Curtis, Nick Castle. A sequel, that Halloween Kills, the 12th film in the Halloween franchise overall, was released in 2021, which I actually saw, and it's a good movie. Considered a classic horror film down to the spooky soundtrack, Halloween inspired other iconic slasher films like Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, A Friday the 13th. More family-friendly Halloween movies include Hocus Pocus, A Nightmare Before Christmas, Beetlejuice, my all-time favorite, and It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. All Souls Day and Soul Cakes. The American Halloween tradition of trick-or-treating probably dates back to the early All Souls Day parades in England. During the festivities, poor citizens would beg for food, and families would give them pastries called soul cakes in return for their promise to pray for the family's dead relatives. The distribution of soul cakes was encouraged by the church as a way to replace the ancient practice of leaving food and wine for the roaming spirits. The practice, which was referred to as going a solum, was eventually taken up by children who would visit the houses of their neighbors and given ale, food, and money. The tradition of dressing in costume for Halloween has both European and Celtic roots. Hundreds of years ago, winter was an uncertain, frightening time. Food supplies often ran low, and for many people afraid of the dark, the short days of winter were full of constant worry. On Halloween, when it was believed the ghost that ghosts came back to the earthly world, people thought they would encounter a ghost if they left their homes. To avoid being recognized by these ghosts, people would wear a mask when they left their homes after dark so that the ghosts would mistake them for fellow spirits. On Halloween, to keep ghosts away from their houses, people would place bowls of food outside their homes to appease the ghost and prevent them from attempting to enter. Black cats, ghost on Halloween. Halloween has always been a holiday filled with mystery, magic, and superstition. It began as a Celtic end of summer festival during which people felt especially close to deceased relatives and friends. For those friendly spirits, they set a place at the dinner table, left treats on the doorsteps, along the side of the road, and lit candles to help loved ones find their way back to the spirit world. Today's Halloween ghosts are often depicted as more fearsome and malevolent, and our customs and superstitions are scarier too. We avoid crossing paths with black cats, afraid that they might bring us bad luck. This idea has its roots in the Middle Ages, when many people believed that witches avoided detection by turning themselves into black cats. We try not to walk under ladders for the same reason. This superstition may come from the ancient Egyptians who believed that triangles were sacred. It's also or may have something to do with the fact that walking under a leaning ladder tends to be fairly unsafe. And around Halloween especially, we try to avoid breaking mirrors, stepping on cracks in the road, or spilling salt. Halloween matchmaking and lesser known rituals. But what about the Halloween traditions and beliefs that today's trick-or-treaters have forgotten all about? Many of these obsolete rituals focused on the future instead of the past and the living instead of the dead. In particular, many had to do with helping young women identify their future husbands and reassuring them that they would someday, with luck, by next Halloween, be married. In 18th century Ireland, a matchmaking cook might bury a ring in her mashed potatoes on Halloween night, hoping to bring true love to dinner who found it. In Scotland, fortune tellers recommended that an eligible young woman name a hazelnut for each of her suitors and then toss the nuts into the fireplace. The nuts that burned to ashes, rather than popping or exploding, the story went, represented the girl's future husband. In some versions of this legend, the opposite was true. The nut that burned away symbolized a love that would not last. Another tale had it that if a young woman ate a sugary concoction made of walnuts, hazelnuts, and nutmeg before bed on Halloween night, she would dream about her future husband. A young woman tossed apple peels over her shoulder, hoping that the peels would fall on the floor in the shape of their future husband's initials. Tried to learn about their futures by peering at egg yolks floating in a bowl of water, and stood in front of mirrors in a darkened room holding candles and looked over their shoulders for their husbands' faces. Other rituals were more competitive. At some Halloween parties, the first guest to find a burr on a chestnut hunt would be the first to marry. At others, the first successful apple bobber would be the down the aisle. Of course, whether we're asking for romantic advice or trying to avoid 7 years bad luck, each one of these Halloween superstitions relies on the goodwill of a are the very same spirits who presence who present the early Celts felt so keenly. And that is the end. There is one history thing about Halloween that the article does not mention is jack-o'-lanterns. Jack-o'-lanterns originally started out as turnips, and I will not be reading the story here, but they have legend of, and I think Ireland as well, if I remember right, of a man named Stingy Jack who constantly tricked the devil into not taking his soul. And when he died, he refused heaven because he was a trickster. And the devil refused to allow him in hell because he promised never to take his soul. So the devil gave him an amber. Stingy Jack hollowed out a turnip with a face on it and put the ember in the turnip and wanders around with it. Over time, Jack's lantern became Jack-o'-lantern. And as the Irish immigrated to America, pumpkins were more available than turnips were. So gradually, the turnip jack-o'-lantern evolved into the pumpkin jack-o'-lantern we all know today. But so far, that is be all for today. I want to let you know that our next holiday thing will be our church's winter festival or celebration called Christiyohanawana. I say the same all the time, and now I can't. Christiyohana is a celebration of the winter holidays. It starts the first day of Hanukkah, which is the last week of November this year, and runs all the way to the last day of Kwanzaa, which is basically November, New Year's Day. So, hopefully, by the time Christiyohana Kwanzaa comes back around, you'll all celebrate it with us. You don't have to celebrate the whole thing. You can celebrate the part that aligns with your faith or what you celebrate. But we will see you next week. And remember, when we all come together, the possibilities are endless. Thank you very much.